There is a sound that never stops on a hive world. It hums through the steel ribs of the city, through the rusted veins of pipes and vents, through the bones of the people who never see the sun. It's the drone of labor and desperation, the hymn of the forgotten billions who live beneath the shadow of the imperial Aquila. Here, the sky is a myth, and the air tastes of ash and recycled chemicals. The lowest levels never see the star zone, the flicker of malfunctioning lumen strips, and the dim glow of promethium fires. Children grow up learning the rhythm of the manufacturum before they learn to speak. The weak are recycled. The strong are broken, and still the hive endures. For every soul that collapses in exhaustion, 10 more rise from the shadows, praying that the emperor, who they will never meet, and who will never hear them, might one day notice their suffering. This is not the story of soldiers or saints. This is the story of survival, the faceless millions who keep the Imperium alive, even as it devours them whole. If you wish to walk further into the underbelly of the Imperium where faith, hunger, and machinery intertwined, then remain with us. Like, share, and subscribe to strengthen this channel's own survival in the endless hive. Every click, every word, fuels the next descent into the darkness of the 41st millennium. The descent begins with a single breath, one that tastes of iron, oil, and human fatigue. From the glittering spires above, where sunlight is filtered through layers of stained glass and toxic haze, the world falls away into shadow. The air grows thicker, hotter. The sound of industry replaces the sound of wind. The upper hive fades from view, and all that remains is the endless machinery of survival. Elevators groan like dying titans. Chains rattle through shafts that stretch for miles, and every step downward is a surrender, a step closer to the bowels of the machine god's forgotten temple. Down here, beneath the iron sky, light is a luxury no one can afford. The walls sweat rust and heat. Rivers of coolant and promethium trickle through fractured pipes, casting reflections that shimmer like molten gold across the blackened steel. The air hums with life, but not the kind that breathes, the kind that grinds, whirs, and shrieks. The manufacturum never sleeps. Servitors, their flesh fused with metal, shuffle in mechanical rhythm, their eyes milky and unfocused, their lips twitching with forgotten prayers. Vox grills crackle with orders in a dozen dialects, none of which carry mercy. The air itself seems to pulse, as if the hive is alive, and everything within it merely part of its endless metabolism. The workers here are ghosts in motion. They move with the precision of habit, not hope. Thousands labor side by side, their faces hidden beneath grime and respirator masks, their voices drowned beneath the thunder of presses and furnaces. Every motion is ritual, every task a form of worship. Before each shift cycle, they murmur the same old litany: the Emperor protects, the machine provides. Some whisper it into their cupped hands. Others trace the imperial Aquila across their chests with fingers scarred from decades of servitude. It's not faith, as the upper priests preach it. It's survival wrapped in superstition, belief carved out of necessity. And still, the hive never forgets to remind them of their place. The ceiling above is a web of pipes and hanging chains, forever dripping with condensation that smells faintly of blood and oil. The floor beneath their boots vibrates with the movement of titanic gears below, the grinding of unseen engines that power entire sectors. Every wall bears the mark of centuries, dents, scorch marks, stains that no solvent could ever erase. Each is a story of someone who once worked here and never left. The air carries a strange symphony, the hiss of steam vents, the clatter of conveyor belts, the distant wail of sirens. Beneath it all, the ceaseless heartbeat of the hive pounds on, a low, mechanical rhythm that threads through every breath, every word, every moment of silence. Some say you can feel it even in your bones, that the hive's pulse merges with your own until you forget where man ends and machine begins. But lately, the rhythm has changed. It began as rumor, passed between laborers over recycled water rations and dimly lit fires. Some said they'd heard it a different beat, beneath the familiar hum, slower, heavier, too deliberate to be the sound of machines. They called it the sleeper's breath, half in jest, half in fear. A superstition to explain what logic could not. But superstition carries power here, where knowledge is dangerous and curiosity kills more than any weapon. One worker, Hal, swears he felt it through the soles of his boots, a tremor that seemed to reach up and grasp his heart. He said it wasn't the movement of pistons or gears. It was too alive. He spoke of it once, in whispers, during the off-cycled rest. The others told him to stop, to forget, to pray harder. He didn't. That night, the lights flickered. Power faded, sector by sector, until the darkness swallowed the lower floor. For a moment, the endless drone of the machines faltered, and in the silence that followed, something else moved. A deep, resonant pulse echoed through the metal, like a heartbeat buried miles below. Once, twice, then again. Ek froze, his breath catching in his throat. The servitors stood still, heads twitching, eyes flickering as though hearing something beyond human frequency. The vox grills crackled, sputtered static, then went dead. The air was thick, charged like the moment before a storm. He placed his hand against the floor, trembling. The vibration came again, slow, deliberate, as if answering his touch. Not a machine, not random, a rhythm. Too slow, too aware, and in that breathless instant, as the light sputtered back to life and the drone of the manufacturer resumed, Hal realized something terrible. The hive was not only alive, it was listening. The sound calls him downward, a rhythm that no longer hides behind the hum of industry, but guides his every step like a heartbeat buried in the veins of the hive itself. Hal moves through corridors forgotten by the administratum and untouched by the light of the upper manufactorum. Here, the air clings to the lungs like oil. Every breath carries the taste of rust and something older, something organic that has no place in steel. The walls seem to close in as he descends, the passage narrowing until even sound struggles to pass. Somewhere above, the great engines of the hive roar and thunder. Down here, that sound becomes a dull, distant murmur, like the heartbeat of a dying god. He passes through a hatch rusted with centuries of neglect. Beyond it lies a tunnel lined with pipes thicker than his body, each pulsing faintly with a red glow. Condensation drips from overhead like a constant rain, gathering in shallow pools that reflect the flicker of emergency loops. Jorik stops to listen. There is no movement, no voices, only the rhythmic tremor that led him here, steady and patient. The further he goes, the more he feels it beneath his skin, as though the hive itself is watching through the walls. Once, these lower levels served as maintenance sectors, meant for the machine priests and their servitors to tend to the great engines of production. Now they are tombs. Long ago, the adeptus mechanicus sealed off the access points and marked the region as not infrastructure, but everyone in the knows what that means, where the machine's hunger grew too great, where the line between man and mechanism blurred until even the omnissiah turned away. He steps over the husk of a servitor slumped against the wall. Its flesh has rotted away, leaving behind a rib cage laced with wire. The vox grill embedded in its throat sputters, releasing a static hum that almost forms words. Jorik leans closer, just enough to catch fragments. The Emperor sees it crackles before dying into silence. He whispers a prayer under his breath and keeps moving. The floor below him shudders. A faint vibration, like something immense stirring far below. The tunnels become stranger the deeper he goes. The metal walls are no longer smooth but textured, covered in what looks like growth tubes and tendrils of fiber that pulse faintly with a sickly amber light. When he brushes his fingers against one, he feels warmth. Not mechanical heat, but the warmth of flesh. The touch leaves his skin damp, and he pulls away quickly, wiping his hand on his sleeve. A low hum follows him now, a resonance that seems to come from the walls themselves. Somewhere in the distance, he hears a voice whispering in binaria servitor's corrupted prayer, looping endlessly in a tongue long abandoned. He stumbles upon a chamber lit by the glow of a single hanging lumen. The light sways gently, casting long shadows over a shrine built from the remains of those who once worked here. Bones fused with circuitry, skulls wired to terminals, the imperial aquila carved into flesh that was never meant to last. At the shrine's center burns a faint light, powered by a generator that groans with age. Jorik realizes with horror that it is not Prometheum feeding it, but something else, something thick and dark, dripping from tubes that pierce through the corpses arranged in reverent poses. He turns away, bile rising in his throat. The whispers grow louder as he presses deeper into the sub. He finds a corridor lined with shattered data slates and broken vox units, all flickering with fragments of sound. Prayers, litanies, pleas. Voices of those who once tried to call for help but were swallowed by the silence. One message repeats endlessly through a damaged speaker. Do not go lower. The machine devours. The words are distorted, warped by static, but the tone carries fear even through the centuries. Still, he does not turn back. Maybe it's madness. Maybe the rhythm that called him down has infected his mind. But there is something ahead, something that feels alive. The air is warmer now, wet with condensation. A faint current flows past his ankles, carrying the smell of ozone and decay. The walls throb gently with every beat of that impossible pulse. It feels like a breathing organism, an entire ecosystem built from metal and memory. At last, the tunnel opens into a vast chamber, its roof lost to darkness. The ground slopes downward to a great sealed gate, massive and ancient. Cables run into it from every direction, as though the entire hive feeds into this one point. The sigil of the adeptus mechanicus is engraved deep into the surface. But time has warped it, its perfect symmetry disrupted by corrosion and strange, organic patterns creeping across the metal. Jorik stands before it, his heart hammering in time with the pulse beneath his feet. He takes a step closer, his hand trembling as he reaches out to touch the surface. The metal is warm. For a moment, it feels like it's breathing. Then, from somewhere beyond the gate, comes the faint, unmistakable sound of inhalation. Slow, deep, alive. Jorik staggers back, staring at the sealed door as the realization sinks in. The machine is not dead. It sleeps, and it dreams beneath their feet. The gate gives way with a sigh that sounds almost human. Steam bursts from its seams in pale clouds, curling through the darkness like ghosts freed from centuries of captivity. The air that spills out is ancient, dry as parchment, carrying the faint scent of ozone and incense. Jorik Hell hesitates before stepping through, his silhouette swallowed by the glow that leaks from the newly opened chamber. The hum that guided him this far has become something else now, not a rhythm, but a pulse, deep and resonant, like the beating of a colossal heart buried in the metal veins of the Hive. Beyond the threshold lies a vast sanctum carved into the bones of the world. The space feels impossibly large, cathedral-like, yet intimate in its silence. Rusted cogitators hum faintly in the shadows, their lights flickering in uncertain patterns. Columns of cabling rise from the ground like petrified trees, their roots merging with the stone and metal beneath. Along the walls, rows of servitors stand motionless, each frozen mid-task, their limbs stiff with centuries of inactivity. Their faces, half flesh and half brass, bear expressions of eternal obedience. Even dead, they wait for orders. Jorik's boots crunch over a layer of dust so fine it clings to the air itself. He shines his light toward the center of the room and sees an altar, or perhaps a controlled dais rising from the floor. It's shaped like a gear, adorned with filigree script and half-erased sigils of the adeptus mechanicus. The words carved into it are in high Gothic, faded but still legible. Faith is the function of all things. He touches the inscription and feels warmth beneath the surface, a faint vibration like breath. The machine is not dead. It merely sleeps. Above him, hollow screens flicker to life without warning. Their light paints the chamber in a shifting mosaic of color and shadow. One screen displays the image of a saint, her face obscured by static, but her halo burning bright. Another shows a diagram, the schematic of a city that could be the Hive itself, its layers descending infinitely downward, labeled only with a single word: Continuum. The boundaries between worship and engineering blur in the glow. Schematics of prayers, power conduits are veins of devotion, and every gear, every circuit turns not out of logic, but faith. Jorik stares in awe. He understands, in a way, what the mechanicus meant when they spoke of the Omnissiah, not as a god, but as a purpose. These machines are not waiting for masters. They are praying. Every servo arm still humming, every cooling vent sighing in rhythm. It's all a hymn in motion, a song of endless function. Even without direction, they remember the shape of obedience. There is beauty in that futility and horror. He moves closer to the dais. A broken vox grill lies beside it, half buried in the dust. On impulse, he reaches down and brushes it clean. The grill sputters, coughs, then releases a burst of binary chatter, sharp and rapid, echoing through the chamber. The servitors twitch. Jorik stumbles back as the symbols on the altar flare to life, glowing with pale blue light. The vox continues to speak, a message cycling in an endless loop, its tone urgent, almost pleading. Jorik doesn't understand, binary can't, but some fragments slip through the static, translated imperfectly through the cogitator screens. Warning. Containment failure. The awakening below. The awakening below. The words hang in the air like frost. Then silence. He stands there, heart hammering, surrounded by the echoes of forgotten gods. It feels wrong to breathe, as if the sanctum itself listens. The flickering holoscreens begin to change, cycling through images of the Hive, not as it is, but as it was. glorious, clean, bathed in light. Then the images degrade, riots, fire, decay, the slow drowning of civilization beneath its own weight. The machines recorded everything. They have been watching all this time. A low vibration runs through the floor, stronger now. Dust trickles from the ceiling. The servitors' heads turn in unison toward the altar, eyes glowing faintly red. Somewhere deep below, something groans, a sound like metal shifting against bone. Jorik stares at the dais as the light intensifies, flooding the chamber with radiance. For the first time, he feels truly small. All his years of toil, the endless cycle of work and exhaustion, the blind worship to a distant emperor, all of it, perhaps, has been part of this greater mechanism, this sacred futility, a hive built not merely to sustain life, but to preserve memory, to keep something asleep. Then the hum deepens. The vox grill crackles once more, softer now, almost gentle, like a whisper. Binary static spills into the chamber, forming one final phrase before cutting to silence. It remembers, the lumen flickers. One by one, the servitors raise their heads. The altar begins to tremble, and somewhere in the dark below, something vast begins to move, something that has waited far too long to wake. Morning in the hive is a lie told by light. The lumen strips stutter awake, flickering through the endless haze until the metal corridors glow a sickly imitation of dawn. There is no sun here, no horizon to divide day from night, only the slow mechanical rhythm of existence. The air tastes of burnt promethium and stale sweat, heavy with the residue of too many lives packed too tightly together. Somewhere above, sirens blare the start of the shift cycle, and the city exhales. Billions move at once. Jorek, Hal wakes to the sound of the hab block groaning round him. His cot, bolted to the wall, vibrates with the distant rumble of industry, a constant reminder that the hive itself never sleeps, only hungers. He pulls on his respirator, the rubber cracked and stained from years of use, and the hiss of filtered air fills his ears. The mask costs more than he earns in a cycle, but without it, he'd drown in the smog before his first shift. Every breath here is bought with labor. Every moment of life is a transaction. Outside, the corridors pulse with movement. Men, women, and children shuffle in half-light, faces hidden behind masks, eyes dulled by repetition. The air hums with the rhythm of boots striking metal, of machinery far below grinding the bones of the hive's underbelly. Vendors shout through vox grills, their voices distorted and metallic, ration paste. Fresh from the only 3 thrones a scoop. The irony is not lost on anyone. Nothing here is fresh. Even the paste tastes, recycled chemical sweetness layered over the bitterness of decay. Lines form at every corner, winding like arteries through the steel labyrinth. Ration cards are clutched like relics of faith, stamped with the aquila and smeared with grease. At the distribution points, servitors dispense grey nutrient slurry into dented tin bowls. The workers thank them anyway, murmuring the emperor's name with cracked lips. Gratitude is as mandatory as obedience. Those who fail to perform it risk more than hunger. They risk notice. And in the hive, notice is death disguised as bureaucracy. Jorek watches an old man trade his respirator filter for a handful of rations. The transaction is wordless. Desperation is its own language here. Around them, the air thickens as the upper manufactoria ignite their furnaces. The heat seeps downward, baking the lower levels until the walls sweat and the pipes groan. Sweat drips from Jorik's temples, pooling beneath the collar of his coveralls. He imagines the endless towers above him, filled with nobles who breathe clean air and call it divine right. But that thought is dangerous, so he buries it under the noise. He makes his way toward the gate, where the crowd funnels through scanners, guarded by skittery sentinels. Their armor gleams faintly beneath the industrial light, red robes stiff with oil and circuitry. The workers lower their heads as they pass, a gesture less of respect than fear. The skittery do not speak. They don't need to. Their presence is language enough. Jorik knows the rules. Don't look too long, don't talk too loud, don't think too much. The Hive rewards obedience, not awareness. Inside the manufactorum, the sound is overwhelming. Pistons hammer in endless rhythm, chains rattle, and the air shudders with the roar of titanic forges. The scent of promethium hangs thick and acrid, stinging the throat. Workers move like cogs in an incomprehensible machine, each action precise, repetitive, unthinking. Jorik joins them, hands steady, eyes blank. To falter is to die. Hours blur into the mechanical hum. There is no time, only rhythm. When the shift horn finally sounds, it's less a mercy than a reprieve, the promise of a few hours of exhaustion in stillness rather than motion. Jorik steps out into the corridor, his ears ringing, his body slick with grime. Around him, voices murmur low, not prayers this time, but whispers, rumors spreading like infection. Someone heard it from a ration clerk, someone else from a skittery aide. Ration shipments have been cut. The administratum blames transport delays, but no one believes it. Word is, someone is hoarding supplies, siphoning food meant for the lower levels and selling it to the spire dwellers above. The rumor ripples through the habs faster than smoke, carried on breath and suspicion. Jorik feels it tighten his chest, the way fear always does, sharp, constricting, alive. He looks at the faces around him, pale behind masks, eyes hollow with hunger. Something is changing. The air feels different, heavy, expectant. Above, the lumen strips flicker again, as though even the light hesitates. The Hive's hum deepens, vibrating through the walls like a warning. Jorik exhales, the sound muffled by his respirator, and for a moment, it feels like the whole city holds its breath with him, waiting for something to give. The deeper one descends into the Hive, the more the light forgets you. Down here, the glow of the lumen strips above fades into a dirty amber haze, swallowed by smoke and the breath of a million machines. The air clings to the skin like grease, heavy with the stench of recycled oil, promethium exhaust, and blood turned to dust. The hum of the upper manufactoria becomes a memory, replaced by whispers. Low and quick, the language of those who live beneath the Empire's notice. This is the market of shadows, the place where survival has a price, and morality has none. Every sound here has intent. The clang of rusted shutters signals an exchange. The hiss of a vox grill means a bargain sealed. You can hear the mechanical pulse of bionic hearts bought second-hand, the shudder of lungs patched with scavenged filters, the dull thump of a corpse cart being emptied before nightfall. Traders squat behind metal partitions, their eyes darting like rodents. One sells cracked augmetic limbs, still slick with the blood of their previous owners. Another offers flasks of corpse starch, pale and grainy, worth more than gold to those whose rations ran out days ago. Every transaction here is measured in breaths. How many you can afford to take before hunger, infection, or the Arbites find you. A skittery patrol passes through the narrow lanes, their metal feet striking the ferrocrete in perfect rhythm. The crowd freezes, the noise dissolves. Their visors glow faint red, cutting through the smoke as they scan the human mass. No one speaks. The traders become statues. For a moment, the only sound is the crackle of static from their voxlings. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, the skittery move on, cold, efficient, and uninterested in the petty crimes of the dying. The moment they vanish, the hive exhales again, and trade resumes, faster, quieter, hungrier. Fear itself has become part of the economy. A woman drags a child by the arm, offering him to a man wrapped in steel cables and servo claws. He inspects the boy's hands, small, dexterous, unbroken, and nods. Payment is a ration chit, stamped with the sigil of an overseer. The mother does not look back as she walks away. In the shadows behind her, two men argue over a bag of recycled protein paste, and one ends up with a knife between his ribs. No one screams. A pair of servitors haul the body aside, stripping it of anything useful before dumping it into a recycler drum. The hum of the machine drowns the last sound of life. There are stalls here where the emperor's image has been defaced, painted over with crude symbols of profit and chance. But not all have abandoned faith. Near the edge of the market, where the light flickers weakest, a preacher stands on a pile of rusted crates. His robes are tattered, the color of old parchment. The vox unit hanging from his neck sparks and crackles as he speaks, each word fractured, distorted, but still his voice carries. He preaches salvation through obedience, claiming the emperor's gaze reaches even into this pit. His words, broken though they are, draw a crowd. The starving and the scarred gather close, their faces lit by the faint lumen flicker and the preacher's fire. For a moment, the noise of trade fades. Even the criminals listen. But faith in this place is dangerous. The Arbites arrive without warning, black armor glinting beneath flickering light, shock mauls humming with energy. Their formation cuts through the crowd like a blade. The first strike is a sound more than a sight. The heavy crack of bone, the shriek of pain swallowed by static. The faithful scatter. Traders dive for cover. The preacher raises his arms, voice breaking through distortion to cry for mercy, for order, for belief. The Arbites give him silence. In return, the silence of impact, of a maul against flesh, of a man collapsing into devotion's ruin. Smoke rises from the chaos, grey and trembling. The market falls quiet. The only thing left moving is the preacher's vox, still hanging from his ruined body. It sputters, sparks, then begins to hum with one last fragment of his sermon, a prayer carved by static. He watches. Always, the sound loops, fades, returns again. Somewhere in the distance, a ration bell tolls. The people of the hive return to their trade, stepping over the fallen as if death itself were just another currency. But the echo of that broken voice lingers, caught in the ducts and vents like a ghost, a reminder that even in darkness, belief can still cost more than life. The riot left a silence that didn't feel like mercy. It was the kind of quiet that settles after thunder, when the air is too heavy to breathe and every sound feels like a betrayal. The lower levels of the hive still stank of burned oil and blood, the echo of the preacher's broken vox lingering in the ducts like a haunting. But above it all, the rhythm of life resumed, because it had to. The manufactoria roared again, their furnaces vomiting heat and light into the choking air. The ration lines reformed at dawn's false glow. The workers returned to their stations with the same hollow eyes, the same measured steps. Nothing had changed, and yet, somehow, everything had. I could feel it in the way people prayed. Before, the words were mumbled out of habit, rote syllables repeated to appease the Imperium's shadow. Now, there was weight in them, grit, defiance, something raw and desperate. They prayed not to be saved, but to endure. In the glow of failing lumen strips, families huddled over their thin meals of corpse starch and machine-filtered water, tracing the imperial aquila in the air with trembling fingers. The symbol was no longer just devotion, it was survival wrapped in ritual. The children didn't understand, not fully. They whispered the Emperor's name like a charm, something to keep the cold away. But the adults, they understood too well. Faith had become currency. Not the kind you could trade, but the kind you clung to when all else was stripped away. The mechanicus preached efficiency, the administratum demanded quotas, and the arbits enforced obedience. But the people had learned that believing was its own quiet rebellion. The recitation of a litany before a shift, the sign of the aquila, drawn in oil on a machine's side panel. The whispered words of gratitude after surviving another cycle, all of it was resistance disguised as reverence. Because down here, where hope was rationed like air, belief was the one thing they couldn't tax. You could hear it in the tunnels, too. The scavengers who ventured into the toxic veins of the Hive, searching for scrap or forgotten tech, would stop at the entrance, lay their hands against the cold ferrocrete, and whisper prayers into the dark. Their voices carried through the ducts, soft as smoke, mingling with the hum of machines. Emperor, guide my breath. Emperor, guard my sight. Emperor, forgive what I must do. Each word was both plea and apology. And when they didn't return, their names were etched onto the walls in grease and ash. Their final confessions written in the only ink that never fades, here grime and sorrow. Still, for every whispered prayer, there was another sound creeping through the Hive, a static pulse, faint but growing. It began in the vox lines, first a hum, then a tremor, then words no one could quite make out. Some said it was just interference from the upper manufactoria, a byproduct of overworked conduits. Others whispered it was something else, a voice, a message, a warning. The arbits claimed ignorance, the overseers dismissed it. But in the hub blocks, where rumor spreads faster than light, the story took form. Shipments were missing, transports, delayed rations cut in sectors that had never faltered before. Someone, somewhere, was bleeding the system dry. The uncertainty was worse than hunger. People started hoarding scraps, bartering tools for food, hiding from skittery patrols who now moved with greater purpose. The sermons grew quieter, the prayers harsher. The preacher's followers, what few remained after the purge began, gathering again. Not in open corners, but in the dark. They spoke of faith not as obedience, but as judgment. They said the Emperor was testing them, that their suffering was the forge of his plan. And in the flicker of failing lumen light, you could almost believe it that pain was holy, that endurance itself was a kind of victory. Yet beneath that sacred calm, the tremor grew. It was in the way machines stuttered at shift change, in the way ration distributors ran dry hours too early, in the way people began looking over their shoulders before speaking. The Hive's hum was changing pitch, as if something vast and unseen was straining beneath the weight of its own function. In the manufactoria, the smell of oil turned sharper. In the dormitories, the air grew thick with whispers, and in the silence between the clang of gears and the sigh of steam, there was something else apulse, steady and low, echoing through the walls. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't human. It was the sound of a city that knew it was about to break. The hive still moved, still worked, still prayed. But if you stood very still, you could feel it the tremble beneath your feet, the shallow, uneven breath of a dying machine trying to remember how to live. And somewhere deep below, the vox crackled again. The descent begins with a sound, soft at first, like distant rain, but it isn't rain. It's the drip of condensation from rusted pipes, falling into pools of filth that shimmer in the half-light. Down here, the walls breathe. The hive's heartbeat is slow and labored, echoing through iron bones. The sublevel corridors twist like veins beneath the great manufactoria, choked with soot and incense smoke so thick it stings the eyes and sweetens the breath. The air tastes of metal and old prayers, of faith burned down to ash. Candles flicker in recessed alcoves, their wax a greyish hue that's not quite wax at all, rendered from the fallen, gifted to the emperor in death as they were in life. The prayer warrens are no cathedral. They're a warren of suffocation and devotion, walls lined with crude icons carved into scrap plating, each one depicting the emperor not as a god of light, but as a figure half swallowed by shadow. Pilgrims crawl between these altars on bloodied knees, whispering litanies so old that even the ecclesiarchy would not recognize the words. Some wear masks fashioned from cloth and machine wire, believing anonymity purifies the soul. Others expose their faces, letting the smoke paint them in streaks of black and gold. When the chant rises low, unified, endless, it mingles with the distant groan of machinery, so that no one can tell where worship ends and labor begins. Faith here is not something you speak, it's something you breathe. It stains the skin, clings to every motion. The devout touch the same relics over and over: rusted cogs, shattered lasgan casings, dented servo skulls bleaving, each one to hold a spark of sanctity. The emperor's name isn't shouted in triumph here. It's murmured like an apology. Each prayer is a transaction, a trade of pain for another day of life. The people no longer pray for salvation. They pray for endurance, for the strength to survive one more shift, one more breath. The shrines themselves are built from scrap broken circuit boards, fragments of armor, discarded offerings from generations who could not afford better. At the center of each altar, an image of the emperor stands, the details long eroded by centuries of touch. His face is smooth, his eyes hollowed, the once gilded aquila now a dull, corroded brown. Yet still they come. Men and women with calloused hands press their foreheads to that worn surface, leaving behind a sheen of sweat and oil as proof of their devotion. They whisper promises that the hive will swallow before anyone else can hear. Some among them remember the old stories, how the emperor sits eternal upon the golden throne, guiding mankind through the warp storm. Others, younger and hungrier, no longer repeat that liturgy with conviction. Their faith has become functional, stripped to its bones. To them, the emperor is not a savior, but a witness, a silent overseer who does not intervene, who watches as the gears turn and the weak are ground beneath. Yet still they kneel, because what else is there to kneel for? Among the faithful, there are moments when the silence between prayers feels heavier than the prayers themselves. A pause too long, a gaze that lingers too hard on a cracked mural. You can sense it, the question trembling behind their lips. If he truly watches, why does he never answer? The words are forbidden, heretical, but they bloom in every mind eventually. Some crush it with repentance, others nurture it, let it grow like mold in the dark. The deeper you go, the stranger it becomes. The altars change. Some are adorned not with the emperor's likeness, but with shapes that don't belong, patterns of teeth and wings and spirals, drawn in soot and blood. The air hums with something wrong, something alive. The hymns falter here. Pilgrims quicken their pace, eyes averted, for they know what happens to those who linger too long near the corrupted icons. The ecclesiarchy doesn't come down here anymore. The adeptus arbites rarely bother. Whatever faith remains has been left to rot in its own silence. It was on the 5th level down that the pilgrim found it. A small shrine tucked into the corner of a collapsed passage, hidden behind a curtain of chains. The air around it was colder, damp with the scent of old tallow and ozone. At first, he thought it was just another altar, a slab of stone, an offering of candles, the faint shimmer of devotional light. But then he saw it. The aquila, the sacred symbol of the Imperium, had been carved upside down. Its wings bent downward, its twin heads twisted toward the floor as if in shame. The candles around it burned with pale blue fire, their smoke rising in tendrils that coiled back upon themselves. He froze. No sound, no prayers, just the soft hiss of his breath inside his mask. The candles guttered once, as if exhaling, and for a moment he thought he heard something move within the shrine. A whisper, not in words, but in tone, like a breath drawn through metal. Then the light went out. The deeper we descend, the more the air changes. It grows humid, metallic thick, with the scent of oil and damp insulation. The sanctioned prayers of the upper warrens fade, replaced by murmurs that don't belong in any liturgy. Down here, the walls are tattooed with devotion, words scraped into metal with fingernails. Oil mixed with blood used to paint symbols too crude for the ecclesiarchy to sanction. The lumen strips overhead flicker with uneven light, their dying glow painting everything in shades of copper and decay. Each breath tastes of rust. Each step sounds like blasphemy. The catacombs beneath the Ministerum's reach are not abandoned, they've simply been forgotten. Generations of the desperate have lived and died here, and with them their faith has evolved. They no longer whisper to the Emperor of mankind as he is worshipped on Terra, radiant and eternal upon his golden throne. No, their Emperor has become something closer to them, broken, rusted, enduring despite the corrosion. They call him the Rusted Saint, and they claim he once walked these tunnels in flesh, his veins running black with sacred oil. The first time I heard the name, it was spoken in awe, not heresy. These worshippers anoint themselves with grease and ash. They mark their foreheads with smears of oxidized metal, tracing the shape of a cog instead of the aquila. To them, rust is not decay, it is absolution. It is the proof of endurance, of machinery that refuses to die even when forgotten. I watched them file into a makeshift chapel built from dismantled ventilation ducts, the air hot with promethium fumes. They sang to the beat of pistons, their voices rising in rhythm with the pulse of the old Hive machinery, and for a moment it felt holy, not sanctioned, not clean, but real. The preacher of this congregation stood atop a pile of scrap, a skeletal man with augmetic eyes, and a voice filtered through a cracked vox grill. Every syllable buzzed with distortion, his tone rising and falling like a machine on the verge of failure. "The Emperor is with us in corrosion," he cried, arms outstretched. "He wears rust as his crown, because he suffers with his servants." The crowd roared, some wept, others pressed their palms against the walls, as if feeling for the pulse of the god they'd built in the dark. I could feel their desperation bleeding into me. The ecclesiarchy would call it blasphemy. The adeptus arbites would call it sedition. But standing there, in that heat, surrounded by bodies trembling with devotion, it felt more like truth. The faith of the forgotten does not seek to please, it seeks to survive. And when survival is a miracle, even rust becomes divine. Above them, the priests of the Ministorum preach purity and hierarchy. They speak of obedience, of the Emperor's distant light, but they never step foot into these depths. They send down condemning sermons through vox relays, their words distorted by static until they sound more like threats than guidance. They call these people heretics, but never look them in the eye. Never see the way a mother dips her child's fingers in oil and whispers, "Endure." Never hear the way their prayers sound like the hum of an ancient machine, old and weary, but still running. Rumor has it the ecclesiarchy once tried to purge these tunnels, sent a detachment of preachers escorted by skittery to reclaim the faith. They never returned. Some say they suffocated on the fumes. Others say the rusted saint himself rose from the sump pits and claimed them, their voices joining the Hive's eternal hum. Whatever the truth, the Ministorum stopped trying. Perhaps they feared what they might find reflected in this distorted devotion, a mirror of their own sanctified hypocrisy. Tonight, the cult gathers again. The air vibrates with chanting. I can feel it through the metal beneath my boots, a rhythm like a heart learning to beat again. The followers sway, faces painted with soot, their chants merging into something mechanical, ritualistic. And then, through the roar of it all, another voice cuts through. Strong, steady, almost pure. It isn't the old preacher. He lies silent now, slumped in shadow, his augmetic eyes still glowing faintly like dying embers. The new voice comes from the far end of the hall. A man in tattered robes, face obscured by the hood of a rebreather cloak. He doesn't speak through a vox grill, but his words carry with impossible clarity, each syllable burning through the static. The Emperor does not demand silence, he says. He demands truth. And the truth is this: faith without defiance is nothing but fear. The congregation stills. For the first time in a long time, there is silence in the catacombs, deep, total silence. Then, slowly, someone begins to weep. Another falls to their knees. The words spread like contagion, whispered from mouth to mouth. Faith without defiance is fear. And above, somewhere far beyond these tunnels, the pipes tremble, as if the Hive itself were listening. After the preacher's words faded into the dark, something changed in the air. It wasn't loud, not like the riots or processions that sometimes tore through the Hive's lower decks. It was quieter, subtler, a shift felt in the marrow rather than the ear. The sermons stopped echoing from the upper vox. The official hymns fell silent. What replaced them was something smaller, something more fragile, yet somehow stronger. Faith had survived the fire, but it no longer belonged to the ministry. It had returned to the people. The first time I saw it was in the remains of a collapsed hablot, where families had gathered among rusted piping and smoke. There were no relics, no icons of the imperial Aquila, just a simple lantern burning recycled promethium. Around it, they whispered prayers that didn't sound like doctrine. They spoke of endurance, not glory, of mercy, not conquest. An old woman with augmetic hands folded her metal fingers and murmured, "He does not see us, but we still see him." The words spread like embers, quiet, defiant, alive. Above the ecclesiarchy's grand temples still gleamed, their gold untouched by soot. But down here, in the broken veins of the Hive, the people had learned to make sanctity from scraps. They painted the walls not with sacred script, but with fingerprints of oil and soot, each mark a vow to endure another day. Servitors patrolled the corridors, their red lenses dim, their gears whining as though exhausted by centuries of repetition. Some faltered mid-hymn, their voices glitching into static as if even the machines had lost faith in the endless litany. It was said, quietly, that the Omnissiah's patience was wearing thin. I remember passing through the manufacturing district. Long after the curfew bells had faded, the air was heavy with iron dust and the smell of burnt insulation. Workers sat on assembly lines that no longer moved, their faces streaked with grime and tears. They no longer prayed for deliverance. They simply worked slower, each motion deliberate, as though offering the act itself as worship. One of them, a child barely old enough to carry a welding torch, looked up at me and said, "If you won't lift us, we'll climb anyway." I couldn't find words to answer. In that moment, it struck me that rebellion didn't always begin with anger. Sometimes it began with quiet persistence. Rumors spread that the adeptus arbites had begun to notice. Patrols increased in the lower sectors. Yet even their presence couldn't stop the whispers leaking through the vox grills. Anonymous voices, distorted and calm, repeating the same message across the Hive's internal channels. He does not see us, but we still see him. Each repetition was softer, slower, as if the Hive itself were breathing those words. The Ministorum tried to purge the frequency, to smother it beneath sanctioned broadcasts. But the message returned, each night, altered, deepened, layered with echoes that didn't sound entirely human. And then came the stillness. No riots, no sermons, no marches, just the hum of machinery, the slow drip of condensation, and the rhythm of a new faith settling into the bones of the Hive. The quiet apostles, they began to call themselves, not out of pride, but necessity. They didn't seek to overthrow the ecclesia. They didn't burn shrines or deface relics. They simply stopped listening. They turned their worship inward, to the endurance that kept their lungs breathing under layers of rust and ash. In a way, it was the purest faith I'd ever seen. Even the Hive seemed to change with them. The vents breathed slower. The pipes groaned less. It was as though the machine had sensed the shift in its human parts and adjusted its pulse to match. Some claimed the old servitors, the ones that still half-worked, began repeating fragments of the new litanies. Not clearly, but enough to make the skin crawl. A stray hum here, a whispered line there, voices rising from ducts that hadn't carried air in decades. The Omnissiah's hand, perhaps, or something older, something listening. One night, I returned to the catacombs, where it had all begun. The place of the rusted saint. The chapel was empty now, its scrap altar stripped bare, but through the broken vox unit, still wired to the ceiling, I heard the faintest murmur, carried through the static like a heartbeat. We still see him. The sound wasn't coming from nearby. It was deep, impossibly deep, echoing from tunnels no human should be able to reach. The same words again, repeated by something vast and unseen. I stood there for a long time, unsure if what I was hearing was prayer or prophecy. And for the first time in this decaying world of iron and faith, I couldn't tell which frightened me more. From orbit, the world looked serene, a sphere of bronze and ochre wrapped in clouds that shimmer like tarnished gold. The Hive spires rise from that poisoned surface like the fingers of a supplicant reaching for salvation, their tips piercing the smog as if desperate for light. From this height, the world could almost be mistaken for holy. Even the orbital servitors sing its praises, their vox grills leaking the hymns of production into the void. But beauty, like faith, deceives at distance. The closer one descends, the more the illusion peels away, until only the machinery remains. The surface is a graveyard of industry. Each plateau is coated in ash and promethium soot, each crater filled with the runoff of melted metals and human ruin. Vast trains of ore haulers crawl endlessly across the plains, their wheels sinking into dust made from bone and rust. Every sound is mechanical, the grinding of gears, the shriek of pressurization valves, the droning thunder of manufacturing bells tolling the start of another shift. The air tastes of iron and burnt oil. It clings to the tongue like guilt. Even the rain is black, falling in sheets that hiss when they touch bare skin. Yet this is life, ordained, sanctified, necessary. The planetary governor, Lord Varendessel, calls it the weight of imperial glory. He rules from the high spire, a fortress of glass and gold suspended miles above the Hive's uppermost decks. From his balconies, he watches storms churn beneath him, untouched by the stench or suffering below. His court murmurs in the language of quotas and tithes, numbers that bleed meaning the deeper they descend. The vox channels that connect his office to the administratum's data. Relays hum with endless transmissions, production updates, casualty reports, consumption rates of promethium and flesh alike to the Imperium. Those numbers are life. To the people who live them, they are slow execution. Entire sectors vanish from records with the same cold efficiency that approves the next shipment. 1 million deaths noted as attrition. 1 billion lives reduced to a decimal error in a tide scroll signed by a man who has never felt hunger. Somewhere between those digits and the ground, humanity is lost. Still, the machine turns. It always turns as I descend through the haze. The glow of the upper towers fades, replaced by the amber murk of the Hive's lower stratum. Light becomes a suggestion rather than a presence. The air grows hotter, thicker. Somewhere far below, a siren wails, the sound of a work shift ending, or beginning, or collapsing under its own exhaustion. No one up above can tell the difference, and perhaps no one cares to. The Hive breathes through suffering, exhales through prayer, through the viewing slats of a descending shuttle. I see the worker convoys trudging beneath the Hive's support struts, tens of thousands of figures moving in perfect rhythm, grey shapes shuffling between manufacturing gates. They do not speak. They cannot. Many have had their tongues removed for disciplinary efficiency. Instead, they hum, a low, constant sound that fills the air like a mechanical dirge. The guards call it the marching hymn. The workers say nothing. But if you listen long enough, you begin to recognize the pattern, the same 4 notes repeated endlessly, the same plea recycled through generations. I pass the outer vox relay towers, where servitors hang crucified against iron frames, their flesh grafted to cables that pulse with light. Their eyes flicker with machine code as they chant the Emperor's praise across the planetary network. To the untrained ear, it sounds holy, rhythmic, ordered, divine. But listen closer and you hear the distortion. Beneath the praise, a faint static hum that almost sounds like breathing. The servitors' chests rise and fall in slow unison, though no lungs remain. Some tech priests claim it's just resonance, the vibration of machinery. Others, in hushed tones, say it's the soul. Trapped and unwilling to yield, the shuttle breaks through the final veil of smoke, revealing the Hive's heart, a labyrinth of lightless corridors, burning forges, and endless labor. The air trembles with the heat of furnaces large enough to forge starship hulls. Beneath me, the procession of workers enters the manufacturing gates, vanishing into the glow like offerings to a god that no longer remembers their names. Each shift is 12 hours long, though time here no longer obeys such measures. The clocks have long stopped. Only the bell matters, the bell that tolls at the end of every cycle. When another 1,000 fail to emerge, their names are erased from the ledgers, their bodies recycled into the system, their numbers replaced before the next dawn. And far above, in his suspended palace of glass and gold, Lord Varendessel receives a new report. Production efficiency increased by 0.3%. The servitors on the orbital relay sing again, louder this time. The hymn of the Emperor echoes across the void, clear, cold, triumphant. And beneath that sacred noise, the world keeps burning. The hum is constant. It fills every corridor, every lung, every thought. The people of Hive Arctis do not notice it anymore. The endless drone of machinery, the rhythmic pounding of manufacturing pistons, the distant shriek of metal being born and broken again. It is the Hive's heartbeat, artificial and eternal, a sound so steady it has replaced silence itself. But beneath that mechanical rhythm, another pulse beats the human one, fragile and irregular. You can almost hear it if you listen close enough. The shuffle of boots on grated floors, the hiss of respirators, the whisper of prayers muttered through cracked lips. The shift begins before dawn, though the concept of dawn has long been forgotten here. The lumen strips flicker once, twice, a ritual gesture that marks the start of labor. Overseers bark orders through vox grills, their voices flattened by distortion into something neither human nor machine. Quotas must increase. Output must rise. Praise be to the Emperor. The words fall like scripture, repeated so often that meaning has worn away, leaving only command. Workers move in columns, their backs bowed beneath the weight of fatigue and expectation. Some carry tools, others their own prosthetics, replacement limbs built from scrap and devotion. The manufactoria are cathedrals of noise. Great furnaces roar with promethium fire, casting molten light on walls engraved with the imperial aquila. Conveyor belts stretch into infinity, carrying raw or that will become munitions, plating, servitor, casings, anything the Imperium demands. The air is heavy with oil and ozone, hot enough to sting the eyes. Even the air recyclers groan under the strain, exhaling warmth that smells faintly of copper and sweat. Each station is manned by dozens of laborers, their movements synchronized with mechanical precision. They don't speak. They don't dare. The punishment for inefficiency is swift, and it burns. Adeptus Arbites patrol the catwalks above, their visors black and unreadable. They watch in silence, shock mauls resting against their shoulders, fingers brushing the triggers of suppression bolters. Below them, the enforcer's servitors drag away those who falter, limbs twitching, still alive enough to regret the mistake. Their bodies will return as something else, something useful. Nothing is wasted here, not even failure. And then there are the voices, from every corner, from every rusted speaker and broken grill. The sermons flow, the daily litany of obedience broadcast by the Hive's minister. To serve is to live. To question is to die. The Emperor provides purpose, and purpose is all. The drones repeat the creed until it blends seamlessly with the sound of industry. It becomes part of the air, part of the self. Even the children hum along, their lips forming the words before they learn what they mean. But faith, like machinery, wears down. Sometimes it slips. You see it in the way a worker hesitates before kneeling to pray, in the way a mother covers her child's ears during the sermons, pretending it's to keep out the noise, in the way a flicker of light on the ceiling draws dozens of eyes upward, not to the emperor, but to the idea of something brighter and still. The machine demands obedience. Deep within the manufactrum's core, the mechanicus priests perform their rituals, robed figures of iron and incense. They speak to the engines in binaric cant, their prayers encoded into static bursts that echo through the hive's foundations. Sparks dance around them like insects, drawn to the magnetic pulse of devotion. The priests never look at the humans working beside them. Their faith is in the machine alone. They anoint pistons with sacred oils, whispering blessings that sound more like code than hope. Some say the priests no longer remember what language is. Only function, only command, but even perfection trembles. The blackout begins with a flicker. A single lumen dies, its filament burning out in a hiss of smoke. Then another, and another. The hum of the manufactoria stumbles, an impossible thing, like a god forgetting its own name. For a moment, the hive is silent. True silence. No engines, no sermons, no orders. Just the sound of breathing, uncertain and collective. Some workers drop to their knees, thinking the end has come. Others stare into the dark, their eyes wide with something that looks like awe. Somewhere in the depths, a child whispers, "Is he watching now?" But no answer comes. Only the slow creak of cooling metal and the echo of a machine heart that has stopped beating. In that silence, the hive feels alive for the first time. And then, from the far distance, a new sound rises. Not mechanical, not divine. Something else. The silence came like a wound. For the first time in generations, the hive was quiet, not the usual background hum of life and labor, but a suffocating stillness that pressed against the skull-like pressure from deep water. The endless thunder of the manufacturum engines had ceased, their vast pistons stilled mid-stroke. Steam no longer hissed from ruptured valves, and the rhythmic clang of metal on metal, the sound that had become the lullaby of the oppressed, had vanished. In that vacuum, you could hear it, the faint rustle of breathing, millions of throats gulping the same stale air in disbelief. It was as if the hive itself were holding its breath, waiting to remember whether it was still alive. Somewhere in the dark, a child cried, one thin voice swallowed by the enormity of absence. And then another joined, and another, until it became a soft chorus of confusion. The lumen strips had died one by one, cascading down the endless corridors like the extinguishing of a god's heartbeat. Men and women stood frozen beside their workstations, their hands still trembling from the habitual rhythm of labor they no longer performed. Even the servitors, stripped of higher thought, twitched in the dark, their cogitators grinding against the unexpected void of command. The air smelled of oil and burnt ozone, the metallic taste of promethium residue clinging to the tongue. For a moment, a dangerous, fragile moment, the people remembered themselves. Without the roar of machinery to drown it out, the mind began to wander. Thoughts that were forbidden began to surface, like drowned things rising to the surface. Questions formed. Where had the light gone? What if it did not return? And beneath those fears, something older stirred, a hunger for meaning beyond obedience. Through the darkness came the distant hum of chanting. Not human voices, but mechanical ones, harmonizing through vox grills, warped by centuries of corrosion. The servitors were reciting maintenance hymns to the machines that had failed them, their half-human throats straining to appease dead engines. "Glory to the Omnissiah," they murmured, over and over, as if repetition could summon function. Their voices echoed through the empty halls like ghosts preaching to ghosts. Above, the administratum preachers took to the pulpits, their amplified sermons breaking through the void. They called for calm, for faith, for patience, their words heavy with desperation disguised as devotion. They spoke of divine tests, of sacred silence sent by the emperor himself. The crowd listened, not out of belief, but out of habit. The people bowed their heads, repeating prayers that had long ago lost their meaning. And yet, somewhere deep in that ritual, fear began to crystallize into a dangerous kind of awareness. If the emperor demanded their faith to survive the dark, then who had turned out the light? Far beyond the Hive's choking skies, the tithe ships still rose. Their engines flared against the void, carrying tons of processed or promethium canisters. And the quota of human lives demanded by the Millennium. The blackout below did not matter to them. The Imperium's arteries never stopped flowing. Every world's pain was another's sustenance. That was the nature of eternity, built on the backs of the replaceable. The scale of it all was too vast to comprehend, and yet the Hive's silence had made it intimate. Every life here, every broken spine and blistered hand, existed to keep the stars burning elsewhere. When the power finally returned, it came not with a roar but a whisper. The lumen strips flickered uncertainly, bathing the corridors in sickly, uneven light. The machines coughed back to life, gears scraping against half-cooled teeth. And like obedient extensions of their tools, the people moved. No words, no protests, just motion. The rhythm of labor returned, measured and mechanical, as if the blackout had been nothing but a pause in a song they could never stop singing. But something had changed. Beneath the mechanical din, beneath the reawakened engines and clattering conveyor belts, a second sound lingered, faint, almost imperceptible. It was the echo of that silence, the memory of awareness that refused to die. Some claimed later that the Hive itself had learned to think in that darkness, that its endless corridors and machine veins had tasted stillness and understood it. The idea was heresy, of course, the kind that vanished men from records and erased families from Habs. But the thought remained, hidden in whispers and dreams, and in the depths of the manufactorum, where coolant mist still hung like incense, a servitor stirred. Its optic lens was cracked, one dim light flickering like the last ember of a dying star. It turned its head toward a broken wall panel where someone had scrawled a crude imperial aquila in soot and grease. For a moment, the light within its lens caught the symbol, reflecting it in warped miniature. The wings burned, golden and trembling, reflected in the glass of a machine that no longer remembered it was human, still burning, still watching, still hungry.